Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma and Brian E. Roach.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name's Joe Kuzma. Joining me to my side is Mr. Brian E. Roach. Brian, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm just dandy. How you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. You know what? We've got a two-parter here because we might have some other news, and I didn't want to talk as we tend to get, especially myself. I'll admit it. I get long-winded. A little bit, just a little bit.
It happens sometimes.
Yeah, it does. It will happen again with this particular episode. I got a little bit of a rant, just in case it sounds weird and we're not immediately diving into the Dupree news, the Hilton news, this, that, or the other thing. We got some other stuff that we need to cover real quick, and it more or less. A refresher maybe for some of our listeners, some of our supporters of this program probably don't fall into the camp of the sky is falling during free agency. It's like, how long have you been on the Steelers bandwagon for? Has it been longer than a year or two? You should understand how these things operate with the team. They don't usually make big splashes and this and that. But let me start with the most preposterous thing. There's two, actually, but the most preposterous one that I read was that the New England Patriots have all of this cap space, and they're a much better run organization when it comes to their salary cap, this, that, and the other thing. It was like this person completely forgot that the New England Patriots were not good last year. And they had to pay guys that were opted out. Patrick Chung, who just retired this morning. Tom Brady, they were still paying Tom Brady. So when they make this big dip into free agency, they didn't have anybody on the roster last year. That's why they couldn't even afford a quarterback other than, they gave Cam Newton like a one-year deal, and Brian Hoyer was being paid peanuts or whatever. Or Hoyer was there, I think. Yeah, Hoyer was still there. So it unnerves me. It's fire Kevin Colbert, fire Mike Tomlin, who has nothing to do with this stuff, by the way. The stuff, get rid of Ben, get rid of everybody, get rid of Cam Hayward, get rid of anybody that you pay a lot of money to, because you're going to save whatever you're supposed to. Forget the guaranteed money that's spread out over however many years. When you give somebody the signing bonus, when they have certain roster bonuses by a certain date, which is already passed with the start of the new league year, you do not recoup those savings. It doesn't happen. At the same time, they weren't paying Ben. What was the number? Was it 40 million, 42 million, 42?
Something like that.
It was up there. It was $40-ish million. That was the cap charge, but that isn't what they were going to save. And that's my other pet peeve here is that, they should have got, why are we paying Ben all this money? Ben took a pay cut in order to get these guys kind of cap solvent here. They were in it deep, and they got some guys that retired. They took some hits on Marquise Pouncey, Vance McDonald, but they saved some money with them too. And, we'll talk a little bit about that. But first and foremost here is just with Kevin Colbert and saying that you need to fire somebody. I'm trying to figure out the best way to go about this because first, he doesn't draft well, Brian. Can't draft. The guys that are all – hold on one second. The guys that are all hitting free agency right now, they only drafted T.J. Watt. They reached for him. He should have been a second-round pick. And he only got picked in the first round. The Steelers reached for him because of his last name, because of his brothers. They didn't need another wide receiver with Juju Smith-Schuster. James Conner. Oh, here's another – Jeez, oh man, they couldn't have picked a running back any earlier. This is a waste. Keep Le'Veon Bell. Don't forget, keep Le'Veon Bell. This is just a feel-good story from Pittsburgh. Cam Sutton, third-round cornerbacks. They can't draft DBs. They all suck. Josh Dobbs, wasted quarterback pick. Potentially true. They still got value out of him. They traded him and still got him back. So, and then there was a long snapper in there, which totally justified, but we defended it anyways. So if he drafts so poorly, why are we so worried about losing some of these players now as their contracts expire and they become free agents? And you can't afford them. Why? Because they became good players and they have some sort of value that the team can't afford right now because they signed all the other guys you want to be brought back in prior years. Or you just say, nah, Get rid of Cam Hayward. Get rid of Stephon Tuitt. Don't sign Steven Nelson or Joe Hayden. Don't make any moves in free agency. Eric Ebron. Don't do that. Just save all the money. It's just, I don't understand it. I don't know that they hear themselves talking sometimes or think these things through when they make those statements. And again, probably not our listeners here, but I know our listeners, our viewers, are definitely around people who are talking like this right now and have a very short memory on how things operate.
That's a lot to unpackage, man.
Oh, it is. It is. Well, it's all I keep saying is it's the Steelers can't manage the cap. Why are we always in cap hell, so to speak? And why are they paying Ben Roethlisberger? They pay him too much money. If you cut Ben before he restructures his contract, okay, he restructures his contract, he takes a $5 million pay cut, they get about $14-15 million in savings, and the cap hit comes down from that 40-ish down to 25. And then it's spread out. They got some void years in here, which they don't typically use, and that goes for the next 4 seasons. So it's spread out over like 5 years, but they're not eating all of that right now in order to get under a cap number that should have been higher because of COVID. And that really screwed everybody in the NFL. Has got to deal with this. It's the reason why you're not seeing, for example, wide receivers fly off the shelf just yet.
Yeah.
So the Steelers aren't necessarily – it wasn't that they mismanaged this. You had a global pandemic, if you want to call it that impacted the league, impacted tickets and every other thing, impacted revenue to the teams, and the salary cap could have probably been, I think they were originally estimating like 205, and it's like 183. You don't think an extra $20 million could have got them Bud Dupree back? Possibly. I mean, maybe, you know what? Maybe I'm just talking out my posterior here. I don't know.
Although I will tell you, Bud got money. I mean, 85 mil over that. I don't know. I don't know whether they could have matched that dollar.
Yeah.
For dollar, they would have had the money, but again, then they got a lot of stuff to sign. It depends. I would have hoped they would have done it, but there's no telling. Look, let me start with the Kevin Colbert doesn't know how to draft. Let me just say this: shut up. Just shut up. He does know how to draft. He has been very successful at it. If you want to argue he does not draft first-round cornerbacks well, I will not argue with you there. But, that's not necessarily unique to Kevin Colbert. His hits are much bigger than his misses. There's a lot more positives than guys who just flame out. Yes, there's not a GM in the league who's got 100%. There's probably not a GM in the league who's 50%, at hitting on draft picks. That's just the nature of the beast, my friends. So yes, if you want to pick out Artie Burns and a few others and say, oh, those were terrible picks. In retrospect, yeah, they didn't turn out so good. But
had to draft a corner though. Had to draft a cornerback.
Yeah,
that
draft one
or get lost, get out of town, right?
Yeah. It just is what it is. Kevin Colbert does an excellent job with the draft. And between him and Omar Khan and the rest of the organization, they do a great job of managing the cap the best they can. And the way what that means is the Steelers spend to the limit. They do it by trying to keep their own people and add key veteran pickups. They don't do it by being moronic and overpaying for free agents that have already spent 4 or 5 years or more elsewhere, and then bringing them in and trying to fit that square peg in their round holes. That's not what they do. You want to talk about the Patriots spending all their money. What happened when the Washington football team did that a few years ago? Win any games for them? No.
The Eagles too, man. The Eagles had the dream team. Now it worked for Tampa Bay, and I'll explain why it worked for Tampa Bay. A little bit different of a situation. No, it's not because Tom Brady plays cheaper or whatever else and takes it. Ben takes the same type of pay cuts. Everyone's like, oh, Ben makes someone in our comments said that, I don't even know if this is true, that Ben has made the most money of any quarterback ever or something like that. And even if he did, he's been playing like 18 seasons here.
Probably
you know
for the Steelers for sure, but I don't think.
Well, for the Steelers, I don't know. Patrick Mahomes is making quite a bit.
Right now.
That's not going to catch up to the Chiefs. They're going to. Hey, they got a rookie running back. They get some undrafted. They're cutting guys. They got rid of both their tackles. Look at the New Orleans Saints. They tried to make that push with Drew Brees, the last couple of seasons, and they spent right up to the cap as well. That's just the way it works. And I know they might acquire some outside players, but not everybody's an outside player. They get Michael Thomas in the second round. And you got to pay that guy when he's putting up numbers like nobody else. You're not going to let him go. So there's justifiable reasons to spend the money. I guess one of the big things is that the Steelers are cheap. I've seen that, and it's like, really, they're not really cheap. Last year, we have no idea how they did it, but they were able to go out and get Eric Ebron, and they got a decent deal out of that, I would say, as well. They went out, they paid Steven Nelson. Joe Hayden doesn't hit the headlines and get the credit, and the Steelers don't get the credit for this move as much as maybe they should, because it didn't happen in March, it didn't happen in April, it happened at the end of training camp, and it just so happened to have a little bit of cash in the till, and they were able to get him a deal, and they were able to do it. It was like 2 hours, man. And it took a day to process because Browns didn't even officially release him yet, I don't think. They had the 4 p.m. window, and then you had to wait till the next day. The Steelers filed the paperwork at 4 p.m., and then it happened. But literally, it was like 2 p.m. or something. They're going to release Joe Hayden, and by like 5 o'clock, we already knew it was going to be a done deal or something. It took hours, and he got paid, and he's one of the higher-paid players on the Steelers. I saw somebody break this down, and I wish I could give the proper credit to it. I don't know. Maybe they got it somewhere else. It was somebody on social media, and it said the cap is really structured for you to pay about the top 10 players, maybe 10 mil or so or more. Your quarterbacks are getting obscene amounts of money right now, and then everybody else is on like lower deals, rookie contracts, and that's kind of how it filters out. A lot of the veterans, let's face it, for the amount of we went through the whole list, for the amount of free agents that the Steelers have, how many of those guys did you really want back or need back? Not even like 2/3 of them, I don't think. I don't think you're really looking at, Alejandro Villanueva to come back and guys like that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what they lost, what they could gain in part 2 of this. But the whole cheap thing just kind of gets me. Villanueva's a good example, too. They paid him. They paid him a decent amount of money. David DeCastro, Marquise Pouncey. These are all players, and people tend to forget that those contracts came up, what those markets are for. Guys who get after the quarterback and quarterbacks are the guys who get paid. And they were fortunate enough to have 4 of those guys along that defensive front. Yep. And, you lose one of them with Bud Dupree, but you still have Tuitt, Hayward, and then TJ Watt's going to get paid too. And I'm mentioning this about them being cheap. You think they're going to be cheap with TJ Watt? At least for a week, he'll be the highest paid defensive player when it happens. Every next guy got to have the bigger contract and the bragging rights, as we know. But they're going to back up the Brinks truck for TJ Watt, no doubt about it. Are the Steelers cheap, Brian?
No question. No, the Steelers, are they cheap? No. The problem is that they are not extravagant. Right. What they're not is they don't spend all the money that they need to, that people think they need to spend for every position under the sun. Right. They have their priority positions that they feel are the most crucial ones, and they pay very well for those positions. Ask Mr. Idiot Big Chest if they're cheap. They're not cheap. They paid him 3 times.
He wanted more, though. It was never enough.
That's different. Just because he at one point, if I'm not mistaken, he was the highest paid receiver in the league, and that wasn't good enough. Because why? Because just like you said, 10 seconds later, somebody else signs a bigger deal. Oh, now I'm not the highest paid anymore. You daggone it. It was good enough 2 days ago, but today it's not good enough anymore. Yeah, he had a giant head.
The ego, man.
Ego issues. They're not, they don't, generally speaking, they don't value wide receivers the same way the rest of the league does. Why? Because they're great at drafting them. You want to talk about things they're not good at? They're great at drafting wide receivers, especially later on in the draft. They have hit so many times, it's absurd. And, it just, I don't know. People are, it's just something that I've learned today more so than any other day. And over the last 3 days, and I'm not speaking about this to our loyal listeners and fans. You guys are great. We love you. But people are stupid.
Yeah, people are definitely stupid. There's no doubt about that. You can't, well, not all people, but I'd say a majority of people, and you can't fix stupid. Unfortunately, that's what my buddy Jeff always says. Can't fix it.
Stupid.
Can't fix it, Joe. And we wish we could, but I think some people follow other sports. They see maybe, I don't know, NBA still, they have there's luxury taxes. Major League Baseball, there's a good example. You see what the Yankees versus the Pirates. And I know I'm not really the big baseball guy, but I know some of our fellow Pittsburgh sports listeners out there know that the Pittsburgh, you could almost fund their entire roster with just a single season ticket holder. That's cheap. That's a whole different. I think somebody said it in the comments here on YouTube too. They made that comment too, and it's just like they're not the Yankees. They're not overpaying and paying luxury taxes and all these other things. And I'm not gonna get into that because I don't care about baseball contracts. They're pretty ridiculous for some of these guys. I mean, Bobby Bonilla is still getting paid $1 million a year. It's a smart guy. Unbelievable. So anyway, you've got the Steelers. They're not cheap. They just don't have the money. It was the same thing when Le'Veon Bell was crying about this or that, and then you see how that worked out. And that's the way we usually operate here, is under the assumption of, can they go without a certain guy? Can they move on? We'll talk about that a little bit.
Let me comment on the Le'Veon Bell thing, because they were cheap with Le'Veon Bell.
No, they weren't.
No, they weren't. They offered him a contract that would have paid him more than he got. It would have paid him more over the years than he was able to get. He'd still be making some money as opposed to being on the sidelines doing nothing. So please do not bring up the Le'Veon Bell thing as they let him walk and they refused to pay him. They tried to pay him. Again, I'm so great.
Greedy.
He made the bet on himself, and guess what? He lost.
Yeah, greedy. He wanted it now, and he wanted it all right now. I get it too with Bud. If the Steelers don't have the money, you kind of want it now too as well because of the knee injury.
There was no way they couldn't match that number. That number was just.
There's some other numbers.
They had no shot.
There's some other numbers we're going to talk about. Sticking to the good teams lose good players. And, I mentioned that draft class, and we mentioned the Steelers retaining their own big name players. And just imagine if every draft pick worked out. I mean, we're talking about guys that were in the third or fourth rounds that, they could be losing and they need to pay more money to. Look at, what are those contracts, Brian? Like $600,000, $700,000, and then all of a sudden it's, Cam Sutton, 2 years, $9 million. You know what I mean? It bumps up a little bit. You know what I mean? Was it $9 million? I think Zach Banner was in there too. So,
and his cap hit this year's only 2.5.
Yeah, exactly. But look at the Ravens, and this is going to snowball into another. Well, we mentioned the Saints, and the Ravens are much where I said the Seattle Seahawks were before, and you could even talk about some teams like the Denver Broncos, for example. They went out and shelled out a lot of money and got Peyton Manning. But Von Miller was still on a rookie contract at that time. They had some other guys that were too. I think Danny Trevathan. I'm trying to think because they were able to bring in like Aqib Talib and so. Demaryius Thomas was still on a rookie contract, so that they had money because they didn't have anybody else there. They were kind of wallowing as the middle of the pack or a lower tier team, and they had the money for that reason. That's the reason the Jacksonville Jaguars or the New York Jets or some of these teams have the money to blow. When you're the Steelers and you draft and you're not changing your organization and your system every 2 years, you don't have that money. You have things that are set in place and you're planning for the long term. These other teams they gut themselves, and it's kind of like, would you really want to be a fan of like the Jaguars when they're just, they change their front office and their organization as much as I change my underwear? Almost as much. I change my underwear more often, but more than once every 2 years. Yeah, don't look at me like that, man.
Nasty ass draws.
But you look at the Seahawks had that window. I always talk about that window. Russell Wilson, third round draft pick, rookie contract, does extremely well right out the gate. And then they had all these other guys, like Richard Sherman was like a 5th round pick. They still had like Cam Chancellor, Bruce Irvin was like a 1st round pick, Earl Thomas. Some of these guys were higher, and some of these guys were in the middle of the pack when it comes to their players that they had on those teams. And then it came time for Legion of Boom guys to get paid and for Russell Wilson to get paid. And Russell Wilson's going to get paid because in the quarterback world, they're not a dime a dozen. You can find another linebacker hopefully somewhere, but you're not going to find necessarily another franchise quarterback. And now you see how that's gone. They're still competitive, but they had like 2 Super Bowl appearances like right there, boom, boom, just like that, because they were so great. And that's kind of where the Steelers fell in. It's not the same CBA terms, but when Ben was a younger player. And then you wonder why, you didn't get back to the Super Bowl. But look at all the guys that were getting paid, though. Troy and James Harrison, and eventually they gave Lamar Woodley that landmark deal, and it didn't work out right at the tail end of that. And Casey Hampton and Aaron Smith, guys like that, you know what I mean? They have money invested in different places. They still had to say goodbye to Alan Faneca at one point, you know what I mean? So it's something that happens. And I point at the Baltimore Ravens because as soon as Lamar Jackson they're losing a bunch of players.
Paid.
As soon as Lamar Jackson gets paid, they're not. They have Calais Campbell, they have Ronnie Stanley, Brandon Williams, Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters. They were able to do all this because of the rookie quarterback contract. The Bengals are able to do these things because Joe Burrow's entering his second year. Baker Mayfield, another guy that's going to be getting paid very shortly. The Browns are able to do all that, and they're real top heavy because at least the Ravens. Some of these picks were, toward the bottom of the draft. They were still they were competitive. They were at least the average team. The Browns were absolute trash, and they were drafting at the very top of the draft, top 10 picks constantly. And guys like that they're going to have to pay, they're going to have to make some tough decisions. And some of these guys are going to get older in age, like Jarvis Landry or Odell Beckham and that, and they're just going to go by the wayside. But that's the reason why they're able to afford these things, because everybody else is, they've been playing for the peanuts and Cracker Jacks. You know what I mean? Garrett just got the big deal, but he was playing for next to nothing there too. And I mean, it's still, for anybody like you or I on any regular walk of life, it's all money we would love to have. But what I'm talking about is in comparison to what they could be making for their production within the league. So basically, it's good teams are still going to lose good players. The Ravens are losing quite a bit there. Matt Judon left. We had a whole list of them that were leaving town. A couple of guys on the defense there, but Judon was the headliner. I got to find who else was on this too. I'm drawing a blank at the moment, and his contract was ridiculous too. By the way, I didn't see that coming, nor Carl Lawson's. So, man, I'll tell you get after the quarterback even a little bit.
Paying pass rushes, man. They're paying pass rushes.
They really are. They really are. But it's really. The Browns, Austin Hooper last year, John Johnson this year, it's really a matter of they're spreading some of this money around. It's because of rookie quarterback contracts. We already talked about Ben's contract. Even if you got rid of Ben, then who are you replacing him with? Everybody already hates Mason Rudolph for some reason, especially you. Dwayne
Stop
Haskins.
saying that. I don't hate Mason Rudolph. I just don't think he's a starter. That's all.
Yeah, and Dwayne Haskins, too. I mean, you're going to go into camp with that, then you're going to be crying about sending Ben off. I don't know. If Ben leaves Pittsburgh, you think he would play somewhere else? At this moment, I think he would. He might go somewhere and play a year or two, if there's an opening, if it's the right situation. Chicago?
Somebody would pay him. Again, why? Because there's not that many starting quarterbacks that are available, and people need quarterbacks. It's always a quarterback league, and if they let him go, he'd find a job if he wanted to. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, Ben's contract isn't killing you. Who are you getting for $14 million? I mean, we just talked about how much Chase Daniel was making. What did Andy Dalton just sign for with the Bears? That was the interesting one, because it's like,
I don't remember, but it's more than he should have got.
I don't know. Do you think it's like the running question was that the Bears were trying to go after Russell Wilson? They still have Nick Foles, and then they go and get Andy Dalton. Do you think Andy Dalton's taking you to the promised land?
No, I don't.
I was trying to find out what they gave him. Just let me see. Oh, 1 year, $10 million. So that's about the guy you're going to get. If you're able to get him, they don't even have the $10 million to spend on somebody like that unless you say goodbye to some other players. So I guess in a nutshell, Brian, the Steelers don't splurge on free agency. They usually wait. They let everybody kind of feel around for offers, and then they're able to offer something to some of these players that have been sitting around. And the players start to think to themselves, oh, geez, well, the Jets still have some chump change, but do I really want to go to New York for that? Live in the New York metro area for that cost of living when I can go live in Pittsburgh cheaper for about the same type of contract, or maybe just a little bit less, but I'll save a little bit, maybe on my taxes, you know what I mean? No income tax if you go to Florida or Texas, you know, some of these places. So they got some advantages there, a state income tax, that is. So there are advantages to that, but, you know, you got to think, okay, Pittsburgh, play for Mike Tomlin, a team that always has winning seasons or is competitive or is a playoff or potential Super Bowl contender, and maybe I can get a chance at a ring. There's a lot of other factors that weigh into these decisions. And just for me, I'm just kind of like, okay, they'll wait around and then they'll surprise us. It took them about a week to sign Eric Ebron, I think, last year.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden that news dropped, and that's why we're doing a two-parter here, because if we continue talking about this and then some other news happens to drop while we're yapping, the show will be dated immediately. So yep. I think we can put a bow. I think I got all of my collective salary cap things in order here. It has nothing to do with Big Ben or his contract, and even if it did, who are you replacing him with for that type of money? He also took a pay cut. He also redid his contract to save the team money, to be able to make a couple of the moves that they actually did, no matter how big or small those may be. Other teams have money because they've either stunk or they have rookie quarterbacks under contract, or about to. In the case of the Jaguars, just cleaned house with everybody. Dolphins did it the year before. You got to be willing. How willing are you to have a season where you're absolutely certain? Would you like to have 2019 back? The 2019 Steelers back, where they struggle, they're semi-competitive, but that might still be where they are, by the way. They may not even fall from grace as much as some of these other teams. So you can get all this cap space, reset, have higher draft picks, et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of the pattern that a few of these teams are following, but you have to be willing as fans to sit out a year or two in order to let that materialize. And there's still no guarantee that all the moves that the Patriots have made or any of these other teams are going to transform into a Super Bowl championship.
No, I don't know that the Patriots are going to end up winning their division. You know, even that. They still, even with everything they've done, they still may not even make the playoffs. No. They're going to beat Buffalo twice? No, I don't think they are. They're going to beat Miami twice. They never do, even with Tom Brady. So, no.
No, playing down in Miami is an advantage for the Dolphins. That seems to any teams that come up from the north. See, it's kind of the opposite of the West Coast and East Coast. Yeah, that's a problem for New England. Always has been for some reason. And it's a divisional game.
Sure, they'll beat
I have no idea what to think of the Jets. I mean, they're once again changing the underwear there. So, I mean, this all has to do with parity in the NFL, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But, you know, when you look back at the draft class of 2017, that roster still had Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell, Martavis Bryant, and then all of a sudden you needed to find Ryan Shazier's replacement out of all that. And if those guys, some of them were still on the roster right now, you definitely wouldn't have a crack at some of the other players whatsoever. In fact, some of the guys, like I said, Bud Dupree wouldn't have been there last year. They wouldn't have been able to tag him. They wouldn't have been able to tag him.
Absolutely.
They would not have had the money. And for all intents and purposes, the Steelers have a lot coming off the books for next year. They're going to have more guys they'll need to sign. I know but they'll have the space to be able to do it and then some. So they're kind of going through the growing pains right here, and we're going to cover a little bit of what this roster looks like, what they've lost, and everything out here in part 2 of our free agency podcasting special. Brian, thanks for joining me, my friend, and look forward to seeing you very soon again.
Absolutely. I'm always thrilled to be here. And, it's always fun.
Always fun, my friend. For everyone out there, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget, we've got 2 episodes of fun for you because we didn't forget about you. We just wanted some news to kind of matriculate here and not be behind the curve or say anything that was too dated here. So
you said my word, matriculate. I love that word.
I like it. It's right up there with plethora.
Yes.
My name's Joe. His name's Brian. And we encourage everyone out there to listen to all of our episodes, of course, even go back. We're going to cover some of this too. The broken clock was right twice a day, at least. We hit a couple of our predictions. So some more free agency coming your way. So be safe, be good, and we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.